fine. It's good. Okay. All right, guys, let's learn.
Little
So this week's Parshas Bamidbar, the Torah tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu was commanded by Hashem to count the Jewish people. Right? Mitzvah in the Torah to count the Jewish people. So the way the Torah introduces that mitzvah is the following: Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe, that Hashem said to Moshe, Bamidbar Sinai Lamar, in the desert of Sinai, saying to count the Jewish people. So the pasuk over here gives us an introduction that the mitzvah of counting the Jewish people was given where? In the Sinai, in the middle of the desert. So the obvious question is why? Why is it? What's the Torah trying to tell us with this, this piece of information that was given in Midbar Sinai? The Jewish people until now were in Midbar Sinai. Everything that was going on in Chumash until now was in Midbar Sinai. Why do you have to tell us now? So the Medrash says the following thing in this week's parsha. The Medrash says, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe b'Midbar Sinai." That the mitzvah was given in the Midbar Sinai. So the Medrash says that Kol mi she'ena oisa atzma k'midbar hefker eina yochel liknais es hachachma. The pasuk is telling us the following message, the following hint, that the only way a person could truly merit Torah, could truly merit to be considered a Talmid Chacham, someone who acquires wisdom, is only someone that makes himself like a desert. That's what the pasuk is trying to tell us. That the only type of person that could become a tzaddik is someone who makes himself like a desert. What does it mean? On a simple level, it means to be humble like a desert that everybody walks on, not the not prime real estate in the world. Make yourself like an un. If you're humble, if you have humility, you'll be able to become a Talmid Chacham, to become a tzaddik. Okay, that's what the Medrash says. The problem is, so that's a very nice message. It's a very nice message, but what does that have to do with the mitzvah of counting the Jewish people? What does that have to do with anything? Say that message before the mitzvah of tzitzis, before the mitzvah of tefillin, who knows, whatever. What does that have to do? Why is this message so significant in connection to the mitzvah of counting the Jewish people? Obvious question. Okay. So to understand this on our level, let's talk about Shavuos for a little bit. We know the time period that we're in right now, are between Pesach and Shavuos, is called the days of Sfira. The days of Sfira, Sfiras Omer, the counting of the Omer. What was the Omer? Very simple. What was the Omer? The Omer was that the second day of Pesach, right, the time that we start counting, the first day of the Omer, the second day of the Omer, there was a special mitzvah that in the Beis HaMikdash, the obligation is that the Jewish people had to bring a special carbon, a special sacrifice. That was the Minchas Omer. It was a mincha offering. Mincha is a flour offering, a carbon made of flour. Now, usually when a person brings a flour offering to the Beis HaMikdash, it's made of wheat flour. The Omer was special, that on the second day of Pesach, the mitzvah was to bring a flour offering of barley flour. That was the mitzvah of the Omer. That's the entire period that we're in right now. It's called the days of the Omer. It means we're counting from that carbon, from that sacrifice of barley. Now, Shavuos, there's another sacrifice, another flour offering that was brought. That's called the Shtei HaLechem. That was a carbon of wheat. So we have like a little bit of a process over here. The second day of Pesach, the beginning of the 49 days of Sfiras Omer, we bring a barley carbon. Shavuos, the culmination, where we're leading to, we bring a carbon of wheat. So Baal Tanya says the following thing, and this is going to give us a little bit of an understanding of where we're holding, what we're supposed to be focusing on in this time of year. Very important, very fundamental to what Yiddishkeit is all about. And we're going to see it's very, very fundamental. Baal Tanya says the following thing. The Gemara says in a number of places that barley is not human beings. The Gemara says in a few places the main food for a human being is wheat. The Gemara says, but for an animal, the main food is barley. Barley is considered meichel behemoth. It's considered animal feed. As opposed to wheat, that's considered, food for a human being. So the Baal Tanya says that starting from Sfiras Omer till Shavuos, there is a process, there's a growth, there's a development taking place in each and every one of us. That we start off serving Hashem like animals. That's why in the beginning, the second day of Pesach, we bring a carbon of barley. That's food for an animal. We serve Hashem like an animal. And eventually, over the days of Sfira, to get to Shavuos, we sort of develop into a human being, and we then are able to serve Hashem like a human being. These are the words of the Baal Tanya. So Baal Tanya is telling us the following thing, that there's such a thing, there's two types of service of Hashem, there's two madrigas, there's two different ways to serve Hashem. They're serving Hashem like an animal, and they're serving Hashem like a human being. The truth is, this is found in Tehillim. The pasuk says in Tehillim, David HaMelech said about himself, "Behemois hayisi imach," that when he says about his relationship with Hashem, he says that I'm like an animal. I serve you like an animal. So what does this mean for people like us? It's you have to understand what this is. Serving Hashem like an animal, still serving Hashem. It's a high madrega. David HaMelech praised himself. It was a chashuv thing by him that he served Hashem like an animal. What does it mean to serve Hashem like an animal, and what does it mean to serve Hashem like a human being? So what's the main difference between an animal and a human being? The intellect, right? That's what we all know. It's the intellect. Higher level of thinking, right? Animals do things just instinctively. It's not like they go through a cerebral, logical process of, the lion doesn't sit down and calculate logically whether it's productive for him to go run after that zebra. It just does it. That's just instinct. A human being, it's all about intellect. I mean, we have instincts too, but the pride, the jewel of a human being is this intellect. So what does it mean to serve Hashem like an animal? Listen to the words of Reb Tzadok. I want to read you something. This is a teaching. I think I mentioned this other places. This is such a fundamental principle in Yiddishkeit. You have to hold on to this always. Reb Tzadok writes the following thing. It's in the Divrei Sefer. Iker chashivas hamaisa. If you want to know what type of mitzvah does Hashem really consider chashiv, what act in a person's life does Hashem really, really consider a very chashiv a thing? Rav Tzadok writes, Iker chashivas hamaisa. The main chashivas of an act is kasher einoi margish kol kach hayakar sheish bai. It's dafka those mitzvahs, it's dafka those actions that you don't think are a big deal. That's what Rav Tzadok writes. Iker chashivas hamaisa. The main mitzvahs that Hashem considers very chashiv are dafka those mitzvahs that we don't think are such a big deal. He says, if you're doing a mitzvah and you think this is like such a huge mitzvah, it's not such a big deal to do it then, right? Because everybody if a guy gives $1 million to tzedakah and because of that he has his, he builds a yeshiva and now he has his name on the building, okay, it's not such a big deal to overcome his yetzer hara to do it, because at the end of the day, you get your name on a building. It's not such a big deal to do a mitzvah when you realize that the mitzvah is a big thing. He says, but when you don't recognize how important the mitzvah that you're doing is, but you do it simply, you do it with simplicity, you do it just because it's the right thing to do, not because you necessarily get any honor, any respect, or any ulterior motives. It's just simply you do it out of just the goodness of your own heart. You do it because it seems to be good in your eyes. It's just the right thing to do simply. And it's something that Hashem wants you to do. Then even the smallest thing has the greatest significance. That's what Reb Tzadok is saying. You know what it means to serve Hashem like an animal? It means to serve Hashem with simplicity. What does it mean to be simple? What does it mean to be simple? Yaakov Avinu was praised in the Torah that the pasuk says about him that it was an ish tam, that he was a simple person. Now, Yaakov Avinu, a simple person. Yaakov Avinu's mind was full of chachma that we can't even imagine. He was simple. What does it mean Yaakov was simple? Rav Tzadok is saying, you know what simplicity means? Simplicity means that you do things, why? Just because they're the right thing to do. Not because you get honored for it, and not because you're considered now the best guy in the world. You do it simply because it's the right thing to do. And then Rav Tzadok says, and therefore, davka those things that you do not think are such a big deal, it's davka those things that Hashem cares about the most. Davka those things. Let me read to you a medrash. Listen to this. It's a relatively famous medrash. This is found in Rus, in the Megillas Rus. The pasuk says over there, it's a whole story, but the pasuk says that when Rus, or Gioris, right, when she was very, very poor, Gioris not very chashuv at all, and Boaz was the Rosh HaSanhedrin, he was head of Sanhedrin, he was the Gadol Hador, the greatest Jew of the generation. So Rus, the little Gioris with no background at all, finds herself in the company of Boaz. And the pasuk says about Boaz, "V'yitzbak lo Kelly, that he gave her. She was very poor, so he gave her some popcorn. It was like some you take kernels of wheat in the oven and they toast up. That's what he gave her. Very cheap stuff, not a big deal. He gave it to her to eat, and she ate, and she was satisfied, and she even had some left over to bring home to her mother-in-law. That's what the pasuk says. So the measure says, why does the pasuk go out of its way to tell us this seemingly insignificant act of tzedakah? I mean, it's not a big deal. You take out $1, whatever. How much was this stuff worth already? It wasn't like a big Mesiras Nefesh on Boaz's part to give this stuff. So listen to what the Medrash says. Amar Rav Yitzchak Bar Muryan. Rav Yitzchak Bar Muryan said, Ba kasav l'lamdecha. The pasuk is coming to tell us the following lesson. Shem Adam Oiseh mitzvah, that if you're about to do a mitzvah, ya'asena b'leiv of sholem, do it with a full heart. Do it with a complete heart. Medrash says, She'ilu ha'ya Ruven Yodea. Medrash goes on to explain. If Ruven would have known the son of Yaakov, if Ruvain knew Shakadosh Baruch Hu Machtivov, that the pasuk would write about Ruvain for all of eternity, the pasuk would write about Ruvain, V'yishma Ruvain v'yatzilei miyadam, that Ruvain, when he heard that his brothers were trying to kill Yosef, he planned to try to save Yosef. If he knew that the pasuk would have wrote that down for all generations, that he had the thought of saving Yosef, he would have just he would have done so much more. He would have jumped into the pit, picked Yosef on his shoulders, and ran to his father. The Medrash goes on to explain. We'll explain what this means. If Aaron knew Shakadosh Baruch Hu Machtavol, that the Torah would write for all eternity the following event, act in Aaron's life, that he knew that Aaron was not jealous of his brother Moshe when Moshe was assigned to save the Jewish people, and Aaron was not jealous. If Aaron knew that the Torah would write about him that he wasn't jealous, he would have made a parade to go escort Moshe Rabbeinu. He would have done so much more. And if Boaz knew about Rus, if he knew the Torah would have wrote about him that he gave a little, some kernels of wheat to Rus for tzedakah, then you know what he would do? He would have given, if he knew that the pasuk would have write that about him, he would have given tremendous meals to Rus. So Rav Tzadok explains, what is this Medrash saying? The Medrash is saying the following thing. Dafka these acts that Ruvain and Aaron and Boaz, if you ask them at the time, is it a big deal that you're right now planning to save Yosef? Is it a big deal that you're not jealous of your brother Moshe? Is it a big deal that you're just giving some wheat to this Giyaris? They would have said, this is the most insignificant act of my entire life. I've done so much more. I finished Shas 50 times. My Shemona Esrei is an hour and a half long. I give $1 million to tzedakah. These are the most insignificant things. But says the Medrash, it's dafka these things that are written about them for all eternity. The pasuk doesn't tell us once about Aaron HaKohen's Shemona Esrei. We have no pasuk telling us Aaron HaKohen, the first Kohen Gadol, I'm sure his davening was unbelievable. We have no mention in Tanakh about the greatness of Reuven's tshuva, when he did tshuva for his averos. It doesn't tell us anything about Boaz's learning. The only thing that the Torah records about these tzaddikim was dafka these acts that if you asked them, they would have said it's the most insignificant things in their lives. Listen to what Rav Tzadok writes about this Medrash. He says, the Zen Nikr B'Leiv Shalom, it's dafka because they didn't realize that these things are such a big deal. It's dafka because if you asked them, they would have said these things are nothing. Zen Nikr B'Leiv Shalom, that's dafka the reason why they did it with a complete heart. Why? Because if you think that it's a big deal, then you're not doing it completely altruistically. You're not doing it just because it's a good thing. You're doing it because there's a little part of you that wants to get respect from it. What are the mitzvahs that a person does with a complete heart, with simplicity, with 100% pure intent? It's dafka those mitzvahs that you think are nothing. It's dafka those mitzvahs. So Tzadok writes, that idea, that will to do just the right thing, to do what Hashem wants, that's the most chashuv thing. This happens so much. Sometimes we could fool ourselves into doing things, and a person can even think that he's doing it for the right reasons, but really he's doing it for his own self. There's a famous story. I don't know how famous it is. There's a story, let's say. The Baal Shem Tov said the following thing. He said that there was once a person in a certain village, and Baal Shem Tov said he knew this with Ruach HaKodesh. There was a certain person in a certain village, and this guy was not very well educated. I mean, he went to cheder like everybody else. He learned some chumash, some basic halacha, but nothing too fancy. And he knew from the time that he was a little child that Avram Avinu, the one mitzvah that Avram Avinu was like, the Torah talks about is what? Is Achanas Zarchim, that he would always take in guests, right? That's the big thing. Avram Avinu was very, very much into taking guests. So this guy, from the time he got married, he decided a tremendous thing. He said, he took upon himself that he's not going to make Kiddush on Shabbos, Friday night, until he has at least one guest in his house. It's a beautiful thing. Beautiful minute. Okay. So he's going like this for a couple of years, and it's working well. He always finds in shul a guest that needs a place to stay, and he only makes Kiddush after he invites the guest to his house. So one Friday night in the middle of the winter, he goes to shul, and there's no new faces. No new faces, no guests in town. Okay. So he goes home, he's hoping that maybe, at some point someone's going to wandering down the streets, maybe a poor person, a homeless guy, whatever, he'll be able to invite him in. It's going. There's no one there. There's no one coming. It's a half hour passes, an hour, 2 hours. Not much waiting. There's no guests. So his family's they're getting hungry. It's getting very late. The kids are getting tired and stuff. And his wife tells him, listen, it's a very nice minig that we have, but it's like almost midnight right now. We gotta start eating. It's getting very late. So the Baal Shem Tov said that, but this person was persistent. He said, no, this is my thing. We have to have a guest. I'm not making conditions till we find the guest. So the Baal Shem Tov said that in Shemayim at this time, it was making an unbelievable noise in Shemayim. That the Malachim saw this Jew who doesn't know anything is just unbelievable. He's mamish sacrificing his happiness on Shabbos for Hachnasas Arachim, the mitzvah of inviting guests. It's an unbelievable thing. He was making a big rash, big tumult in Shemayim. To the point where the Baal Shem Tov said that they were preparing Eliyahu Hanavi to come down in this world to pretend, to impersonate a poor person, just to allow this person to do the mitzvah of Hachanasas Arachim. To that point, that's how much of a big deal this was in Shemayim. So this is what's going on. So right down here in this world, his wife is making him crazy, and up there they're preparing Eliyahu Hanavi. So it's mamish atat. The Baal Shem Tov says mamish holding by a few minutes. If this person waited just a few minutes, he would have had Eliyahu Hanavi as a guest. So what happened? His wife's his family's going crazy. So he says, "Listen, I need a guest. I made this thing. This is my minhag. I need a guest. There's no guest. What do I do?" So he went to the barn, and he took out his horse. He put a hat and jacket on his horse, and brought it into the house, and he made kiddush, and the horse was the guest. So the Baal Shem Tov said, "You see this type of person, and in 1 minute he could have had Eliyahu Hanavi as a guest. Instead of Eliyahu Hanavi, he had a horse with a hat and jacket, but it was still a horse at the end of the day, So what type of thing is that? What does this person think? What motivated this guy to go get his horse? Why? Because when he accepted on this thing, I'm sure in the beginning when he accepted this thing to only make kiddush after he has a guest, it was for all the right reasons. But over so many years, it ended up being that he was just trying to make himself feel good, right? The only reason why this guy persistently, I need a guest, because that's what he said. I want to keep up my streak going, right? That's really what it's about. He wanted to keep his streak going, to have a guest. So there's no guest around, just bring in the horse. If this guy was doing it for the right reasons, to feed Jews, okay, if there's no Jews, there's no Jews. There's no mile of bringing a horse in. Teretz says he was just doing it to keep his streak going. I mean, we've had a story like this, where there was a certain person we know. Whatever, you have this all of the time. People have a streak. They want to daven with a minyan. Listen, it's a beautiful thing davening with a minyan, and people get this like a mindset. It's like a streak going. We were by a person. There was a certain event we were by, and the problem was that it was getting late at night, and this person didn't daven Ma'ariv yet. Okay, so and he had a streak. He's going for 3 years. Now he didn't miss the davening without Ma'ariv. So he has without a minyan. So he doesn't know what to do. On the one hand, it's getting late, and there's no minyan around, and there's no place to daven. So he decided, what we're going to do? Let's just get a minyan together, and we'll daven in the middle of the street. Just in the middle of the street, stop traffic. And this was not in a very nice neighborhood. This was in front of a bar, and it was not a club. It was not a nice. This was not a proper davening place. But he said, no, to keep my streak, I'm davening. So what's he doing? Is he doing this simply to serve Hashem, because there's such a thing as davening with a minyan? It's an unbelievable thing. If so, then the same Hashem that says davening with a minyan also says, but not in the middle of the street in front of a club, right? So why is he doing this? Because he wants to keep his streak alive. So that's not what it's about. Rav Tzadok is saying, you want to know what's chashuv? What's chashuv is when you do things simply because it's the right thing to do, not because you're going to get honor, not because it makes you feel good, simply because it's the right thing to do. Simply, that's it. And dafka, those mitzvahs are the ones that are recorded in Torah for all eternity. It's not the Shemona Esreis that of Aaron HaKohen. It's not the learning of Boaz, because Aaron Shemona Esreis and Boaz's learning, they knew those were big deals. It's dafka, the little tzedakah that Boaz did. It's dafka, the little, just the feeling, not feeling guilt and not feeling jealous of Moshe. Those were the things that are recorded throughout time. The Medrash ends off the following thing. Rav Kayin, Rav Yeshua, the Siskin b'Shem Rab Levi, the following Tanaim said, L'sha'avar, in previous generations, during the times of Tanakh, Haya Adam Aisa Mitzvah, when a person did these types of mitzvahs, these small, seemingly insignificant acts, a person would do them, V'hanavi Kaisva. And the prophet, the Navi, would write it in Chumash, right? Aaron HaKohen does this little act, Boaz does this little thing, the Navi writes it in Chumash. Unbelievable. V'achshav, but nowadays, says the Medrash, Kisha Adam Aisa Mitzvah, when a person does these mitzvahs that to him seem insignificant, Mi Kaisva, who writes it? Who records it? So says the Medrash, Elyo Kaisvai. Elyo Navi in heaven writes down these mitzvahs, Umelech HaMashiach v'HaKadosh Baruch Hu Chais Ma'idem, and Mashiach and Hashem himself sign their names on these mitzvahs. And Az Nidbar Yerushem Yeshal Re'eh, when Mashiach comes, those Megillas will be given our own chumashim of recording our mitzvahs. And what mitzvahs are going to be talked about in our chumashim? It's not going to be the big things that we got praised for. It's not going to be the big things that everybody is thinking that it's going to be. It's going to be the small things that you don't even remember you ever did. Because it's dafka those small things that you did with simplicity. It's dafka those things you did with simplicity. That's what it means to serve Hashem like an animal. That's what it means to serve Hashem like an animal. Then that's the beginning. That's the aleph phase of being a Jew. It's serving Hashem just because it's the right thing to do. That's it. On top of that, all my dragas of chachma, all my dragas of learning is built upon. But it's the fundamentals of Yiddishkeit is serving Hashem with simplicity. That's what it's all about. You know, Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest prophet of all time, the greatest Talmid Chacham of all time. The pasuk says that Aaron, his brother Aaron, and his sister Miriam had some complaint about him. Whenever they felt he did something wrong in his personal life, whatever. So Hashem revealed Himself to Aaron and Miriam, and He said, to them, how dare you speak anything negative about Moshe Rabbeinu? And Hashem is going to pick to describe how great Moshe Rabbeinu was. So He picks the one quality. He has to pick one quality that shows Moshe Rabbeinu's greatness. To say, how can you speak about Moshe Rabbeinu? He is so and so. So if you were to ask any of us, what's the greatest quality of Moshe Rabbeinu? I don't know. Maybe his humility. Maybe his his learning. I don't know. What does the pasuk say? How could you speak about Moshe Rabbeinu? B'chol beisi, in all of my house, from the entire Jewish people, nemanhu. He's faithful to me. That's what the pasuk says. Of all the midas of Moshe Rabbeinu, the pasuk singles out his faithfulness. What does it mean? What does that mean? His faithfulness. That's what it means over here. Someone who's faithful means that he serves Hashem like a simple servant. That's what it means. A servant, if you have a worker, right? You have workers. One is working his job simply to make the boss happy, and simply just to keep the business afloat. Then he's the guy you're going to trust, right? He's the faithful servant. He's the faithful worker. It's the guy who has all the ulterior motives that eventually wants to take over your job. He's the guy that you don't trust, right? So what does it mean that Moshe Rabbeinu is faithful? Means that Moshe Rabbeinu served Hashem with simplicity. It means he did things because they're just simply the right thing to do. Because Hashem told me to, that's why I do it. That's it. That's the greatest quality of Moshe Rabbeinu. That's the greatest quality of Moshe Rabbeinu. You know, in Sefer Yeshua, the beginning of Yeshua, the pasuk says, "Vayhi," that Hashem was about to tell Yeshua ben Nun to enter Eretz Yisrael, and it says, "Vayhi achrei Moshe," that the following happened after the death of Moshe. Who's Moshe? Eved Hashem, the servant of Hashem. Simple. If you wanted to define who Moshe Rabbeinu was, that's what the pasuk says. He was a faithful servant. Eved Hashem. What does it mean, Eved Hashem? That's what it means. It means simple. He did it because it was the right thing to do. Zehu. You know, the truth is that about Mashiach himself. That's what the pasuk says. It's the same thing about Mashiach himself. You know, throughout Tanakh, throughout Nevi'im, we have many parts of Nevi'im describing the era of Mashiach, what's going to be when Mashiach comes, what's going to be before Mashiach comes. But we have very limited psukim describing the person of Mashiach, like the person Mashiach himself. One of the most fundamental pasuk in describing the person of Mashiach is the following pasuk in Yeshaya: Hine yaskil avdi. That my servant, Mashiach, my slave, my servant, will be matzliach, ram v'nisa v'gavamai, he'll be exceedingly, exceedingly exalted. That's what the pasuk says about the person Mashiach. When describing the person himself, what does the pasuk use? What title? Yaskil avdi. My servant will be matzliach, and my servant will be unbelievably exalted. That's it, because that's the base. That's what it means to be a Jew. That's the aleph base. To do things simply, just to serve Hashem out of the simplicity of your heart. To do things with a leiv shalom. And again, and that dafka, says Ritzadik, is dafka those things that a person does not realizing that they're significant. It's dafka those things that a person does with simplicity. This is what it means. This is what Pesach is. Pesach, we leave Mitzrayim. That's the building blocks. We begin to become Jews. We begin to become tzaddikim. What's the beginning of Yiddishkeit? What's the foundation? You bring a carbon of barley, meaning you serve Hashem like an animal. Simplicity, just out of instinct, out of just the goodness of your heart, not because you're thinking too much or you get stuff out of it. Just simply, if you have that foundation, eventually you could get to Shavuos. If you have that foundation, that Hashem will give you chachma, Hashem will give you understanding and great enlightenment. But it's only if it's fundamentally based on simplicity. That's what it's all about. That's what all of Yiddishkeit is about. That's it. And that's why we started with a question that why is it that dafka this mitzvah, this week's parasha of counting the Jewish people, the pasuk has to tell us this introduction that it was given where in the middle of the desert. So why? So according to this, and the Medrash said because the fact that it was given in the desert tells you that when a person wants to become a tzaddik, you have to make yourself like a desert. So what does that mean? What does that have to do with counting? You know, counting, what does it mean to count the Jewish people? What does it mean to count the Jewish people? It means that Hashem is telling Moshe Rabbeinu, Su'u es Reish Bnei Yisrael, lift up their heads. It means that you count, that Moshe Rabbeinu, each and every Jew, there's something special about each and every one. That's what it means to count. It means that you're special, you're chashiv, and you're chashiv, and you're chashiv. Each and every person, each and every Jew has some chashivas, some unbelievable quality that Hashem really cares about. So the pasuk is saying, you know what's so special about each and every Jew? It's dafka, the fact that each and every one of you make yourself like a desert. What's a desert? A desert is simple. I mean, there's no great complicated ecosystem in a desert, right? Everything is just hot and rocky and sandy. That's it. There's nothing fancy going on. There's no borders of this is my territory, that's your territory. There's no different types of vegetation. It's nothing. It's nothing. It's simply just earth. That's it. It's just simple. That's what it means. The pasuk is telling us that Hashem said the mitzvah of counting a Jew means that there's something special in each and every. You know what's so special about a Jew? What's really chashuv about a Jew is Bamidbar Sinai. It's dafka those qualities in you that in your mind are the simplest things on earth. The simplest thing you just do because it's the right thing to do. That's what's chashuv. That's what's chashuv. And this is such an important lesson because again we get to Shavuos, a person can convince himself that what's important are the big things, finishing Shas, I don't know, whatever, having a 3-hour-long Shemoneh Esrei, giving a lot of tzedakah, doing all these things. But you know what? At the end of the day, all that stuff is beautiful and it's nice, but you got to make sure that you're not putting a hand jacket on a horse, because you might be putting a hand jacket on a horse because are you doing it to serve Hashem or are you doing it to serve yourself? It's a big litmus test. But that's what it means to be an Eved Hashem. To be a servant of Hashem means to do things simply. So let me end off with a story. There's another Maisa. This is a story. I mean, again, this is it's not a true story. It's a mashal. This is a mashal that Rav Nachman said over. I think I've mentioned this once before. It's a fantastic mashal. He says the following thing. That's the story over here. The story goes like this. There was once a king, and he went with his entourage, with his servants and ministers, the chashuv people in the kingdom. They went to go on a hunting trip. So he says that while they were hunting, while they were out, it started like a torrential downpour just started all of a sudden. Without any warning, it started raining really like crazy. Like mamish and mabel. It was mamish dangerous. And again, in those areas, it wasn't like paved roads and stuff. It was all dirt, and you could get like mudslides. It was really dangerous. So what happens is, after it's all raining, and they see that it's really getting dangerous, so all the ministers, instead of the whole time they're thinking protect the king, protect the king, protect the king, now that their own lives are at stake, everybody forgets about the king, and every minister and every chacham, every philosopher over there runs and just takes care of himself and tries to hide himself, and the king is left without any protection, and the king's life is in danger. The mamish's life is in danger. So what happens? He's sitting there in the middle of this torrential downpour, and lo and behold, just a regular village, a little peasant is wandering by, and the king wasn't wearing his royal clothing. He was going hunting. He was wearing his regular day clothes. And this peasant sees it's just a regular person hanging out in the middle of the forest when it's like mamish dangerous. So he says, "Let me help you." He brings him into his little shack of a house somewhere in the forest, and he gives him some porridge. That's what he says. He gives him some porridge. He makes him sit down. He lets him sit down by the fire. Gives him some dirty rags that at least he had in the closet, and he doesn't realize that it's the king, but he helps this simple Jew out. And the Reb Nachman says that the king was taking immense pleasure in what this peasant was doing. So after the whole rainstorm was over and everything was done, so his ministers realize what they just did. They just abandoned their king, and they come to their senses, and they try to now what? So they have to go find the king, and eventually they find him in this little shack. And the king and the ministers, when they come, the guy realizes that this is the king, and he was just giving him some porridge and giving him some tattered clothing. So the ministers say to the king, "Okay, let's get out of this little place. We'll bring you back home to the palace, where dress you up like the way the king is supposed to be." So the king answers, "Chas v'shalom." When it got dangerous, when it started really raining, all you chachams, all you ministers, all you chashuv people, what happened? You just abandoned me. It was dafka this person. He was the only one that took care of me. So therefore, because of that, not only am I not going to take off his dirty clothing, I'm not going to stop eating his porridge. I'm going to go with him, and he's going to take me on his own little rickety little car, and he's going to become my second in command. So Rav Nachman writes the following thing. Obviously, he said this in Yiddish. It was translated into English. Rav Nachman says, it says like this, that it says in the pasuk that before Mashiach comes, there's going to be a flood. The pasuk says there's going to be a flood. It says Rav Nachman, it's not going to be a flood of water. It's not going to be a flood of any other physical element. It's going to be a flood of immorality. It's going to be a flood of apikarsis. It's going to be a flood of just a coarseness. A person's not going to be able to feel anything. He's not going to be able to sense Hashem at all. It's going to be a flood, mamash, a terrible flood. And Rav Nachman says it's going to cover the highest mountains, and it's going to cover everything. I mean, even Eretz Yisrael will be full of this flood. This means that it will have an effect even in virtuous hearts. The greatest of tzaddikim is going to be affected by this flood, and it's going to be very difficult to be a simple Jew before Mashiach comes. Says Rav Nachman, there is no way to combat this with sophistication. If you think that you're going to become a tzaddik in this day and age before Mashiach comes through your intellect, through being sophisticated, by doing things because your brain says it's the right thing to do, all that, because it feels good about it, it's not going to happen. All the royal ministers will be scattered. That's it. When the flood comes, everybody's going to run in their own little dalet amas. And the entire kingdom will not be firm on its foundations. The only ones who will uphold it will be the simple Jews who recite Tehillim in simplicity. That's it. That's it. The only Jews that are going to be able to withstand the flood at the end of time are going to be the Jews that do things. Why? Because it's simply the right thing to do. And that's it. When the king doesn't look like a king, and he's not wearing his royal clothing, and there's no great reward seemingly coming to you by helping the king. If you just help the king because it's the right thing to do, you say your Tehillim, you get up in the morning, you daven, you do your thing, you serve Hashem like a simple servant. That's the way to survive. And he says, therefore, when Mashiach comes, they will be the ones to place the crown on his head. That's what Rav Nachman writes, and this is something we have to take to heart. This is what Shavuos is about. Shavuos is about taking the omer, taking the carbon of barley, serving Hashem with simplicity and carrying that through our lives. If we have that as a foundation, then Hashem will give us all the merits. Then Hashem will uplift us and give us all the great gifts that we're waiting for. But it's only on the foundation of simplicity. So if we take this to heart and we recognize this, there's no question we'll be worthy not only to survive this time, but to thrive in it and to really grow and to become true servants of Hashem. And we'll be able to see with our own eyes the great servant of Hashem coming. Amen.